first question is, what is the general perception of how long it took SADC to intervene in the situation in Mozambique?
First of all, we would like to acknowledge this decision that has been taken by the SADC of recognizing the seriousness of this problem that we are facing in Mozambique. They recognize now that it's not just a Mozambican problem, it's a SADC region problem, and it should be approached in that way. And we hope that the decisions that were taken and the agreements that they were made will be implemented expeditiously as possible. It's unfortunate that it has taken 3 years after thousands have died, after villages and towns have been destroyed, for SADC to finally realize that we have a serious problem here that must be dealt with seriously. So unfortunately, it has taken too long, but we welcome the decision that has been made in this past meeting.
But Dr. David, you seem to suggest that the impetus is on SADC to come up to Mozambique and offer to help. Should it not be the other way around?
Well, Mozambique is part of SADC, and they should have been working together from the beginning. In our statements that we have released since the beginning of the conflict, we have always called on the Mozambican government to ensure that it fulfills its obligation and responsibility to protect civilians, to protect human rights, and ensure that journalists are allowed to enter the area to do their work and to provide humanitarian assistance. So you are correct, and this is what we've been saying from the beginning in the past 3 years.
Now, does SADC need a technical team that is already legitimized to look into the goings-on in Mozambique?
Well, we believe that SADC is a regional body, an amalgamation of states within the region. All of them collectively have the responsibility to protect the citizens of SADC collectively and ensure that peace and security and human rights and the rule of law are protected and enforced in the region. So whatever SADC can do to ensure that this happens is very welcome, because this is precisely what we've been calling for from the beginning.
Now, you talk about whatever SADC can do. In your mind, what would be the ideal scenario?
So the ideal scenario is for SADC to have a comprehensive response in dealing with the situation in northern Mozambique. First of all, we have a serious problem of security. People are being killed, slaughtered like animals. Villages and towns are being destroyed and burned down. And a response would be, first of all, to ensure security in the area, which is one of the decisions that SADC has taken. But also a comprehensive response includes humanitarian assistance, which is something we have been calling for, and we see that SADC has also prioritized that decision. We also called for development, economic and social development in the area, investment and rebuilding of the infrastructure that has been destroyed. And we see that SADC is also planning and moving in this direction. This is precisely what we are calling for, a comprehensive and multifaceted response.
So what role does organizations such as Total play, who've invested multiple billions of US dollars in that community? Because from what we understand, the cause of this insurgency is a result of individuals that are within that community that are dissatisfied at how they are being treated, so to speak.
All stakeholders have a responsibility to ensure that there's peace and security in the region. Companies, for instance, have the responsibility of investing in the communities that host them, because communities also have a lot to lose. It's not only the investor who puts his finances on the line with the risk of losing it. Communities also put their ecosystems, lands, forests, air, water, lakes on the line. So they have so much to lose. It's very important for these investors to also recognize that and act to prevent and mitigate these kinds of risks. Invest in the infrastructures in the community. They have social responsibility and investment to make. And this is the ideal scenario for companies to consider and act in that direction as well.
Have we seen them doing that?
At the beginning, there were negotiations. However, there have always been complaints that negotiations between the communities and the government and the investors have not gone peacefully. There are complaints that there have been manipulations, intimidations of communities to agree to make room for these companies to operate in the region. So it's very important to include remedies so that these grievances are addressed, and companies have a role to play because there are rules, especially the United Nations guidelines on business. So those should be observed and implemented.
Now, we talk about a SADC Troika, which is heads of government of members of SADC, coming up with a solution to deal with the insurgents, albeit short term. Has there been involvement of third parties in these conversations? Certainly members of that community, members of the investment community, if you will, in coming up with a long-lasting solution.
You are raising a very important issue here, because we believe it's in the best interest of all stakeholders to get involved. Because if that does not happen, we run the risk of making decisions that later are interpreted by some stakeholders as unjust. So it's very important to include businesses, to include communities, civil society, and government officials in building peace and restoring human security in the area. Because peace belongs to all of us. Justice belongs to all of us. Those resources also belong to all of us. So it's better to be inclusive than to exclude others, which will later create problems, which is what we are seeing, for example, in central Mozambique.
Now, the impression I get is that the efforts that are being put in by SADC will be short-term, and as far as if troops are sent in to assist when dealing with these insurgencies, they cannot stay forever. What do you see as a possible solution in terms of maybe capacitating the Mozambican army or the Mozambican forces to deal with this going forward?
So there are also efforts going on, through other international partners in building the capacity of Mozambican security forces to be able to deal with the situation in Cabo Delgado. That's not a short-term solution. That's a long-term solution, because it takes a while. It takes a long time to build capacity of security forces. That is happening. There are also plans, at least decisions, to rebuild the infrastructure. That's not a short-term solution. It's a long-term solution. There's also a humanitarian assistance, because given the scale of displacement of people, we are talking about close to 1 million people, or a little bit more of people. And that kind of humanitarian assistance is also a long-term one. It's a comprehensive strategy that is being adopted not only by SADC, but also by Mozambique and other international partners. So that is happening, and we applaud that.
Dr. David, what I'm curious to know is what happens to the perpetrators of these atrocities? I mean, we've read that a dozen bodies were found with their heads decapitated. Thousands of people have been displaced. Hundreds more have been killed. Women have been raped. So yes, a possible military intervention to push the insurgents out, but what about bringing some of these people to book? Is that part of the plan?
Absolutely. So as I have said at the beginning, for the past 3 years, we've been monitoring the violation of human rights and documenting them. And this month, in fact, in March, which is last month, we published a report where we indicated that the 3 parties to the conflict are committing atrocities. It's not only the insurgents, the armed group that is committing these atrocities. We also have the Mozambican security forces committing atrocities in response to the atrocities of the insurgents. We also had the private military company hired by the Mozambican government to provide assistance there, also committing atrocities. And in that report, we call for an independent, impartial, and exhaustive investigation to bring all those found responsible to justice. So yes, justice is part and should be part of the response, and we'll continue to call for it.
Dr. David Matsinhe, Senior Researcher, Amnesty International, thank you kindly for speaking to us this morning.